I always struggle with this question in part because and this is going to sound so cliched, but I'm very forward marching, and that can be debilitating at times. I feel like I have blinders on that are just looking towards the future. And sometimes that affects me because it prevents me from reflecting well on mistakes. But the first that comes to mind, and this was not just a mistake, it was maybe a collection of what I perceived at the time to be disasters, was in college, undergrad, when I had a huge dispute with my thesis advisor. I also felt like I was being funneled into one of two industries, management consulting or investment banking. This is at Princeton. Very few industries come to recruit there. And as a competitor, I was compelled, I felt compelled, just as I had in school to try to get A's, etc., to compete for the McKinseys and Goldman Sachs of the world. And I remember getting through one round of interviews and just thinking to myself, I don't want to do either of these things, but everyone else wants them, therefore perhaps I should want them too. And that's a big, big warning signal. That's a red flag. It took me a while to identify that, and with the help of an high-tech entrepreneurship teacher named Ed Schau, Zschau, incredible man. But due to the issues with my thesis, I wasn't going to finish it on time for a host of reasons. If people want to learn more about that, they can look up some thoughts on suicide, pretty intense and morbid title, or some practical thoughts on suicide in my name, and it should pop right up. But I went into a deep depression after leaving Princeton for a year. So I decided to take a year off to do two things: to work on the thesis, and I was told, very surprisingly by my advisor, it better be the best thesis I've ever seen. In effect, I'm going to give you a terrible, terrible grade. And there's a lot of background there I won't bore people with right now. But I felt like I was completely trapped in a corner with that. And on the positive side, I decided to test working at companies of different sizes. So I worked at Berlitz for a period of time, helping to redesign some of their Japanese instruction curriculum. And I also worked at a political asylum research firm, and that was very small, 2 or 3 people. And I learned a lot. So where it led me was realizing I didn't want to work in a company of, say, 10,000 people or many thousands of people, which Berlitz was. And I was working remotely, so I also realized there was a social component that was really important to me. I liked to work around people. Even if my team were remote, I wanted to be surrounded by people. And I ended up working at home by myself a lot, and it was mentally destructive. The political asylum research was fantastic because it really put my issues at that time into perspective, because I was dealing with people who were, let's just say, homosexuals in a country where they were going to be killed or had been threatened with death, where family members had been killed, or for religious differences, and they were filing for asylum in the United States to try to escape this type of persecution. And my job was to find experts who could be witnesses and determine what they would call the meritorious nature of these cases. And brutal work, because there were instances where their case was valid, but for a host of technicalities or process reasons in the US system of addressing such things, we couldn't help them. And so literally it'd be like, sorry, you have to go back to this country where you're probably going to be killed, or your family's going to be killed, or your kids are going to be attacked. And that was very, very brutal, but very helpful at the same time for putting my first world problems, should we say, into perspective, which are no less serious in many respects. I should point out, I don't fetishize that like a lot of people. And the very process of having to contend with these existential issues, seeing my classmates graduate a year before me, because I went back to school, I felt completely alone during this period of a year, and it reinforced a few things for me, like the importance of exercise. So that is when I focused on boxing. I went to this gym in Trenton. I don't know if I've talked about this stuff before. Went to a gym in Trenton. I was the only white guy there. Almost everyone was on work release. And I remember the first workout, they're like, oh, let's see how you move. They put me in the ring with this guy who was heavyweight, and immediately broke my nose and just bled everywhere. And people laughed initially, and then they were like, Jesus, this guy's bleeding all over the ring. and pulled me out, and I kept training there. And from that point on, they were fine with me. But the exercise is what kept me sane. And that's when I did the kickboxing training and so on that led to the nationals later in 1999. That's when that was. And that story ended up in the 4-Hour Workweek. So a lot of these existential issues led me to make decisions then. This is leading to a better thing. Coming back into school and continuing to study under Ed Shao and look at entrepreneurship and starting my own thing as the path, as opposed to having forged ahead, perhaps looking back on it, trying to spin it with some silver lining. If I hadn't had the issues in college that I did that led me to drop out and have all of that pain, there's a very non-trivial chance, let's just call it 60-70% chance that I would have ended up at a McKinsey or a Goldman Sachs. Nothing wrong with those things. There are some people who are just hardwired to succeed in those environments and they're perfect fit, but you can't take an undergraduate body of 5,000 people and just divvy it up into 2 industries and expect everyone to be a good fit. I wasn't, but there's a very good chance I would have ended up in one of those career paths, and I think I would have been miserable. I think, therefore, would not have been terribly good at it, and I would have ended up changing direction 5, 10, 20 years later. And instead, the universe kicked me in the nuts and uppercutted me in the fucking teeth, and that was a good thing. So in the span of 6 months, I figured out what could have taken me 10 to 15 years to figure out. So thanks for that, universe. I don't need too many of those in my life, but at the time, that was a good course correction. If you enjoyed this video, I have more to share. All of the tools, tactics, cool things that I'm finding. 5 Bullet Friday. It is an exclusive newsletter. It's completely free. I send it out every Friday. Just has 5 bullet points with the coolest, most useful things that I've found or I'm revisiting that week. And you can find it by clicking here. Takes about 5 minutes to read. Super short, very actionable. 5 Bullet Friday, also found at 4hourworkweek.com/Friday.